there was once the slowest ape on Earth. It was slower than a lion, weaker than a leopard, and smaller than a gorilla. It was a creature naturally destined to die if it came down from the trees. So how did this weakling come to dominate the entire planet? Surprisingly, the answer is because it was weak. Driven out of the forest and forced into plains swarming with predators, it turned into a monster while frantically struggling to survive. Let's dive into this desperate survival story that began in Africa 7 million years ago. Let me tell you a shocking fact first. Our ancestors were not originally from Africa. If we go back 40 million years, the first traces of higher primates were actually found in China. This creature, called Eosimias, which means dawn monkey, also left similar traces in Myanmar and Pakistan. So, the starting point of the entire lineage leading from monkeys to apes to humans was actually Asia. The problem was that a massive ocean called the Tethys Sea blocked Asia and Africa back then. Because of this sea connecting the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, the two continents were completely cut off, and Asian primates had absolutely no way to step foot on African soil. But the Earth started moving. Deep beneath our feet, heat from the core constantly melts rock and pushes it up in a convection current. And this force pulls and moves the continental plates. As the African and Arabian plates slowly pushed north, they collided with the southern tip of Eurasia. And this collision threw up mountain ranges in the Turkey and Iran regions. Islands formed from volcanic activity. And around 20 million years ago, a landmass called the Gomphotherium Land Bridge formed, blocking the Tethys Sea. Asia and Africa were finally connected. As soon as this bridge opened, a great animal migration began. Asian rodents, herbivores, and carnivores poured into the African continent for the first time, while an elephant-like animal called Gomphotherium crossed over to Asia. The land bridge was named after this animal. Here, a crossroads of fate appears. Some primates in Asia crossed over to Africa through this new path. This was an incredibly fortunate event because the primates left behind in Asia were almost completely wiped out shortly after due to severe cold. With temperatures plummeting and forests disappearing, they just couldn't hold on. If they hadn't migrated, we might not exist at all. Only the primates that crossed to Africa survived and began to diversify in the new land. And some of them even went on another amazing adventure. They crossed all the way to South America. Back then, the Atlantic Ocean between Africa and South America was much narrower than it is now. And scholars assume that trees swept away by storms tangled together like giant rafts, and the primates riding them drifted on ocean currents to South America. It might be hard to believe, but this is currently the most persuasive explanation. Let's rewind a bit. Going back to the Miocene epoch, 23 million years ago, apes finally appeared in Africa. What's the difference from monkeys? Apes have no tails. We humans are the same. Their brains are also larger, their social lives are more complex, and their overall body size is bigger. Among early apes, there was one called Proconsul that lived in East Africa 20 million years ago. It had a monkey-like body, ape-like teeth, and no tail. It wasn't a complete ape, but a transitional form bridging monkeys and apes. The climate was excellent during this period, and a climatic optimum hit 17 million years ago, causing temperatures to spike. Subtropical forests spread not only across Africa, but all over Europe and Asia. It was a paradise for apes. With an abundance of trees, apes rode this forest wave and spread wildly across Europe and Asia. Apes lived in Spain, Hungary, and Germany. However, this golden age didn't last long. A few million years later, temperatures began to plummet. The cold snap at the end of the Miocene was truly cruel. The dense forests of Europe began to wither and die. There was an ape called Dryopithecus that thrived in Europe between 12 and 9 million years ago. It was the size of a chimpanzee, with long arms, flexible joints, and thick fingers perfect for gripping branches. Its brain was chimpanzee-sized, and its teeth were optimized for eating fruit. But with the forest disappearing, it had nowhere to live. As their habitats progressively shrank, they eventually went extinct, and almost all apes in Europe met the same fate. Consequently, only Africa and parts of Southeast Asia remained as havens for apes. The lineage that survived in Africa later gave rise to gorillas, chimpanzees, and U.S. humans, while the lineage that went to Southeast Asia became orangutans and gibbons. Here is the core question. Why did only the African apes evolve into humans while the Southeast Asian apes didn't? The answer lies in the unique environmental changes specific to Africa. Around 7 million years ago, something massive was happening on the African continent. A massive crack called the East African Rift was tearing the continent apart. As the tectonic plates split, the Earth split wide open, and to the east of this rift zone, moist air was blocked, causing the climate to dry up rapidly. Like Adam and Eve cast out of the Garden of Eden, humanity was thrown from the comfortable paradise in the trees into the deadly plains lurking with predators. The once dense forests slowly disappeared, and sparse woodlands and grassy savannas increased. When scholars studied the paleo environment, they found that Africa was transitioning from jungle to savanna during this time. This was a disaster for our ancestors. The life of comfortably picking fruit in the trees was over. Without forests, moving from tree to tree becomes difficult. If they ate all the food in one spot, they had to walk quite a distance to get to the next grove. The earth essentially burned down humanity's home and tossed them to the front lines of survival competition. Now there were two choices: starve to death or come down from the trees and walk. Our ancestors chose to walk. Chimpanzees still love trees and use knuckle walking on the ground, walking on their fists. Our ancestors went all in on standing completely on 2 feet. Other apes occasionally stand on 2 feet, but only our ancestors bet everything on it. Why was standing on 2 feet advantageous? First, it is far more efficient for long-distance travel than walking on all fours, because it uses less energy. Also, the African savanna is hot, and standing on 2 feet reduces the surface area exposed to the sun, making temperature regulation much better. Plus, as hands became free, they could pick high-hanging fruit, carry food around, and hold their babies while moving. Eventually, they were even able to hold tools. As all these benefits piled up, standing on 2 feet became advantageous for survival. On the other hand, look at orangutans. They split from African apes during the Miocene and went to the tropical rainforests of Southeast Asia, where the environment was stable. The forests remained intact. With an abundance of trees, there was no reason to go down to the ground. So, orangutans evolved for millions of years in a direction more optimized for life in the trees, with incredibly long arms, hook-like hands, and feet perfect for grasping branches. Because there was no massive pressure, there was no change. Here, humanity's unique cheat item appears: sweat. Under the scorching midday sun fluctuating between 38 and 40 degrees, while all predators were panting with their tongues hanging out, there was only one creature stubbornly pursuing prey at 10 km/h while cooling its body temperature. That was our ancestor. Humanity shed its fur and equipped a full-body water cooling system. Thanks to this system, where sweat glands are distributed all over the skin lowering body temperature through evaporative heat loss, humanity was a terrifying, unstoppable terminator from the prey's perspective. A lion has to rest after a short sprint, and a cheetah must pant for 30 minutes after running at full speed. But humans could run for hours on the burning hot savanna at noon. This is called endurance hunting, and some African tribes still hunt this way today. What is the evidence that they started walking on 2 feet? Bones do not lie. The oldest is Sahelanthropus tchadensis, found in Chad, Africa, 7 million years ago. Its appearance was likely similar to a chimpanzee, but looking at the skull, you can tell it's different. There's a hole at the base of the skull called the foramen magnum. This is where the brain exits and connects to the spinal cord. And if it's located further forward, it means the head sits directly on top of the spine. If it's further back, it means walking on all fours. For Sahelanthropus, this was located closer to the front. While it's still debated whether it was completely bipedal, it walked in a much more upright posture than other apes. Around 6 million years ago, Ororan tuganensis appeared in Kenya. The thigh bone provides crucial evidence here, as the head of the bone looks almost like a human's. Standing upright puts different weight on the legs. This thigh bone was adapted for that function. 4.5 million years ago, Ardipithecus was found in Ethiopia. Also called Ardi, a fairly complete skeleton was discovered, providing a lot of information. The foramen magnum in the skull is forward, the pelvis is bowl-shaped, and the knees slant slightly inward. These are all features necessary for bipedal walking. They help support the weight of the upper body. The funny thing is, its feet still had divergent big toes, good for grasping branches. So Artie was like a multi-purpose vehicle, walking on the ground and climbing trees. It wasn't completely on the ground yet, but in a transitional phase. It was progressively getting closer to human. Then comes a large group called Australopithecus. They lived in East and South Africa from 4 million to 1 million years ago. The most famous one is Australopithecus afarensis, called Lucy, a 3.2-million-year-old skeleton found in Ethiopia in 1974. With 40% of the skeleton preserved, it provided incredible information. Lucy's knees and pelvis were definitely adapted for bipedal walking, and her spine was structured to support an upright posture. There is even more solid evidence. Footprints. They are 3.6 million years old and were found in a place called Letoli in Tanzania. Early humans walked over ground covered in volcanic ash, and more ash piled on top of that, preserving the footprints perfectly. Analyzing these footprints showed the exact same gait as us, striking with the heel first, transferring weight to the front of the foot, and pushing off with the big toe. There are even footprints of a young individual next to an adult's footprints, suggesting a family might have walked together. They were already walking like us 3.6 million years ago. And where did all these bones come from? Entirely Africa. They have only been found continuously on this land. Just after 3 million years ago, a species called Homo habilis appeared. It's the oldest species in the genus Homo. They lived mainly in East Africa. And the important thing is that stone tools appeared with this species. Called Oldowan stone tools, they are very primitive tools made by breaking stones to create sharp edges. They are large and crude, but they were a massive innovation for cutting meat and extracting marrow from bones. The dexterity developed from millions of years of tree climbing was finally being used to make tools. Next, Homo erectus appeared. This is a really important species because it's the first hominin that looked almost like us. They were fully upright, had longer legs than arms, and their brains were much larger than previous species. And crucially, they were the first hominins to leave Africa. Homo erectus started venturing out of Africa 1.8 million years ago. Bones from this period were found in Dmanisi, Georgia, and they appeared in Indonesia around almost the same time. On the island of Java, they lived for over 1 million years. Why did Homo sapiens come from Africa? A question arises here. If Homo erectus spread all over Eurasia and lived there for over 1 million years, why didn't modern humans emerge from there, but rather from Africa? They could have evolved in Europe, or they could have evolved in Asia, right? Homo sapiens, our species, was born in Africa. The oldest Homo sapiens bones were found in Morocco and date back 300,000 years. Why Africa? Genetics gives a decisive hint. Among all the humans living on Earth today, where is genetic diversity the highest? Africa. Overwhelmingly so. What this means is that genetic diversity occurs as mutations accumulate over time. The longer you live somewhere, the more diversity builds up. African populations being the most diverse means Homo sapiens have lived there the longest. On the other hand, people outside Africa only have a fraction of that diversity. That's because a small group left Africa 50,000 years ago. They took only a part of the total gene pool with them. So whether you are European, Asian, or Native American, the genetic diversity of everyone outside Africa is lower than that of African people. This is strong evidence supporting the out-of-Africa theory. So why was Africa advantageous for birthing Homo sapiens? Recent studies show something really interesting. Ancient Homo sapiens had formed a massive network spanning all of Africa. From 320,000 years ago, pigments were traded over long distances. 200,000 years ago, obsidian moved over 110 km. 50,000 years ago, beads made of ostrich eggshells spread across the continent. Why is this network important? Because innovations spread and merge. Each regional group invents something separately. One side makes a sharper stone knife, another side finds a better way to handle fire, and yet another place develops new hunting techniques. When these groups occasionally meet, those innovations combine. To use a musical analogy, blues, country, and gospel developed separately. But when they met at the record store, rock and roll was born. The exact same mechanism happened in Africa over hundreds of thousands of years. As each group evolved separately, various genetic mutations occurred. And when the groups met, those mutations mixed. Genetic diversity is like insurance against environmental change. With diverse genes, someone can survive no matter what environment comes. This pan-continental network in Africa made Homo sapiens an incredibly adaptable species. In fact, scholars studying hunter-gatherer networks have confirmed this. Partially isolated groups developing innovations separately and then combining them advance complex technology much faster than one completely connected, large group. Africa had exactly those conditions. Because the continent is vast, groups lived apart, evolving individually, and occasionally met to mix. As a result, mosaic evolution occurred. The biology and culture of modern humans didn't come from a single tribe, but from many interacting populations. On the other hand, look at Neanderthals. They lived in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years, but they didn't have a network as vast as Africa's. Europe was smaller than Africa, and the habitable areas shrank even more during the Ice Age. Their genetic diversity was also much lower than Homo sapiens. So when the environment changed or a new competitor appeared, it was hard for them to adapt. Ultimately, when Homo sapiens arrived in Europe, they lost the competition. Of course, they didn't disappear completely. There was some interbreeding. Right now, about 1% to 4% of Neanderthal DNA remains in the genes of people outside Africa. But Homo sapiens took the lead. To be fair, let's look at the counter-arguments as well. There is also evidence challenging the out-of-Africa theory. There was an ape called Danuvius that lived in Germany 10 million years ago. Why are these bones important? Because they had a structure that allowed them to stand on their hind legs. They had long front and hind legs, flexible wrists and ankles, and joint shapes that allowed for both climbing and standing on hind legs. Researchers called this extended limb clambering. This is way before the early humans of Africa. Therefore, some scholars argue the origin of bipedalism could be Europe. Another challenge involves Homo erectus. Homo erectus lived in Eurasia for over 1 million years. Couldn't they have evolved into Homo sapiens over that long time? Logically, it's possible. If the wide range of environments in Africa helped the diversity of Homo sapiens, the diverse environments of Eurasia could have played the same role. In the 19th century, scientist Ernst Haeckel actually made this guess after seeing Java man bones. However, genetics denies this. We are closer to African chimpanzees than Asian apes. Lastly, the Homo sapiens bones found outside Africa are getting older and older. A jawbone found in Mislia Cave in Israel dates back 177,000 to 194,000 years. A skull fragment from Apodima Cave in Greece is a whopping 220,000 years old. These are the oldest known Homo sapiens bones outside Africa. They are still younger than the 300,000-year-old bones from Morocco, but you never know what else might be found as excavations continue. Science is naturally meant to advance by challenging current paradigms. While current evidence overwhelmingly points to an African origin, new discoveries can overturn the board at any time. The important thing is to keep an open mind and wait for new evidence. However, all bone, stone tool, and genetic evidence so far points in the same direction. Africa. Let's summarize. The ancestors of our ancestors started in Asia. When the continents connected, some crossed to Africa, and those left in Asia went extinct. The primates that settled in Africa evolved into apes, spread to Europe and Asia during the climatic optimum, and were almost entirely wiped out again when the cold period hit. Only Africa remained as a refuge, and Africa's unique environmental change. The East African Rift tore the continent, forests disappeared, and the savanna was created, which forced apes to stand on 2 feet. There was no such pressure on other continents. Shedding fur and equipping sweat glands, our ancestors became the only creatures capable of running on the savanna at noon. And Africa's massive network made Homo sapiens the most adaptable species. Perhaps our existence is an incredible stroke of luck. Think about it. Those primates crossing from Asia to Africa, those apes surviving the cold, those early humans standing on 2 feet on the savanna, those Homo sapiens creating a cross-continental network. And finally, a small group left their home. They headed to unfamiliar continents with only a fraction of the total gene pool. They spread to Europe, Asia, the Americas, and Oceania. And the result of all those choices, adaptations, and survival is you, watching this video right now. Without Africa, we wouldn't exist. In the end, the history of humanity is a history of adaptation. Only the species that could change according to the shifting environment survived. And the only place on Earth that had all the conditions for that adaptation was Africa. Hit subscribe and join us here at GNow. We'll keep watching the future unfold together. See you in the next video.